Yeah, I can fly.
From the first time I saw the trailer for Iron Man in 2008, I've loved watching the character come to life on the big screen. I'd go as far as to say that Iron Man is probably my favorite character in the now 20-film-long, decade-spanning Marvel Cinematic Universe. That said, while the first two Iron Man entries and even the first Avengers film gave us a character that was fun to watch, he wasn't particularly well fleshed out, or even that interesting. As much as genius billionaire playboy philanthropist makes for a cute soundbite, it really was everything that defined him. He showed some signs of depth here and there, but it wasn't until his third solo outing that Marvel would create a Tony Stark worth caring about. Like I said, up until this point in the MCU, Tony Stark wasn't a particularly well-developed character. His cocky attitude was endearing at times, and a dude in a robot suit flying around and kicking butt is fun to watch, but the movies never really tackled what the character has gone through. He's obviously been affected physically by what's happened to him over the course of these movies, dealing with the aftermath of his capture in Afghanistan by creating newer and bolder technologies. But the films focused primarily on all the cool things he built, and not why he built them. Then comes Iron Man 3. Hot off the tail of the mega hit that was The Avengers came a Tony Stark that had accepted his death as a sacrifice to save New York City, only to have that sacrifice taken away from him. That moment was supposed to be the end of his arc. He was no longer a completely selfish, self-obsessed character, but one that was willing to sacrifice everything to save the people of New York and the world at large. And then he lived. The indestructible Tony Stark who seems to view death as something worth challenging is finally truly faced with it and lives. How does that affect him?
How did he get out of the wormhole?
Wait a minute, Tony. What are you saying? Tony. Sorry. Jerry.
My diagnosis is that you've experienced a severe anxiety attack.
Me?
The first time I saw this scene, I was shocked that Marvel was willing to let one of their headlining characters, the one that started it all in fact, have a panic attack. With Iron Man, it never felt like they were interested in letting him get too deep into things. He builds the suits, shoots the guys, gets the girls, the end. But here, we've got an Iron Man film that adds a layer of depth to those things, specifically with the connection Tony has to his suits. At the end of that first panic attack scene, you don't see Tony confide in his friend or call Pepper. You see him run to his suit. Obviously, it can run diagnostics and check his vitals, but I think that instinctual escape to the suit speaks to a bigger theme that Iron Man 3 tries to cover. Tony has become more reliant on these suits than on anything else at this point, not just as a tool to defeat his enemies, but as a shield from everything and everyone. What began as an attempt to escape captivity ballooned into a piece of his character that is maybe more evident than his ego. Instead of focusing all of his time and effort on getting the shards of shrapnel in his chest removed, he built more and more elaborate suits and reactors. And when those reactors were killing him, instead of finding a way to get rid of them, he created a new element that let him keep them. This is a man that's not interested in solving his problems. He'd rather build around them. He didn't tackle his floundering relationship with Pepper, he bought her a giant stuffed rabbit. Instead of doing what he can to find the Mandarin, he builds a tough guy facade and gets the people he loves hurt. He's not interested in facing the root of any issue, he just wants to find ways to skirt around it. Iron Man 3 shows this in full force. Tony has spent all his time since the events of the Avengers building more and more incredible suits. He hasn't been able to sleep, he's been avoiding friends, and he's locked himself in his basement, tinkering away, trying to create the perfect suit. Not one with limitless power. No, just one that can be there when he needs it. Over the course of the last 3 films, he's created newer and more elaborate means of having the Iron Man suit available at a moment's notice, a crutch to rely on when he needs it most, a reflexive defensive mechanism that he uses to protect himself in times of exhaustion or fear or anxiety. The Mark 42 suit is akin to a manifestation of his inability to cope. It's the penultimate creation, finally a suit that's truly a part of him, in all the worst ways. It causes harm to the ones he loves, but he also can't get rid of it. It weighs on him, and while his inability to fix it only causes him to acknowledge how much he really relies on the suit, it also gives him a chance to come to terms with his own abilities. After the Mandarin bombards his home, Tony's forced to operate without his suit for the first time in a long time, and his adjustment to this fact reminds not only the viewer, but also himself what he's really capable of. You see how ingenious he can be on the fly without any of his fancy gadgets. Whether it's regular guards or extremist guinea pigs, he's capable of handling himself, regardless of how dangerous the situation might be. He's not standing there, helpless, waiting to be given his suit. He's solving the problem on his own. Give the man a box of scraps, and he'll get by just fine. Tony can manage without the help of his suit. So when he chooses to blow it and the rest of the suits up at the end of the film, it means something. It's more than a cool fireworks display, it's an end to Tony's long journey of disconnecting from the suits. He accepts that he no longer needs all of them to be the man he wants to be. But, of course, this is a Marvel movie, and the franchise has to move on. Not everything that happens here sticks. Tony dons the suit and becomes Iron Man again, but Iron Man 3 is still effective in creating a more sympathetic Tony. Now viewers understand how strongly Tony's fears can consume him, so when he sees the vision of Apocalypse in Age of Ultron, you understand why he reacts the way he does. He didn't sign the Sokovia Accords in Civil War because he wants to screw everyone over, he's just come to realize how dangerous he truly is. In Homecoming, he doesn't want the Spider-Man suit to become something Peter entirely relies on in the same way he became too reliant on being Iron Man. And in Infinity War, the eventual creation of a suit of nanomachines that's always with him, like a further escalation of the Mark 42, isn't in defiance of Iron Man 3's point. It's an acknowledgement that, like the introduction of the Iron Legion, Tony has found ways to turn his harmful coping mechanisms into something useful. Dealing with the trauma of the ending of the Avengers was only part of it though. There's so much in this movie that Tony has to deal with. He had to watch the terrorist organization he thought he had dismantled come back to haunt him. Pepper was taken away by a man he neglected. One of his oldest friends got blown up. The guy goes through a lot, and he has to go through it without the part of him he's always turned to for a sense of security. But he does get through it. He stops the man behind the terrorist group. His friend is okay. He saves Pepper. And finally, he faces his greatest challenge by confronting his own problems. Tony getting the shrapnel removed from his chest is a clear statement that he is willing to fix his problems instead of building something to mask them. He's not a new character, but an evolved one that doesn't use the suit as a crutch. He wanted to get better, and he did. He didn't get over everything completely. The messages presented in the film aren't entirely forgotten throughout the rest of the cinematic universe, and that's only been for the best. Stark is no longer simply the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist. He's become more than that. I think I look back on Iron Man 3 so fondly because it's a movie that is willing to tackle a deeper exploration of a character. It's certainly not perfect. The Extremis plotline is weak at best. The kid, while a nice example of how Stark could be empathetic,
So now you're just gonna leave me here, like my dad?
and apathetic, is a little underplayed. And while I liked it, I get why people weren't totally sold on the reveal of the Mandarin being a facade instead of a real threat. But none of that really gets in the way of Tony's journey. And even with those weaker plot elements, you get to watch how he fights through his current dilemma to face each of those issues. Ultimately, Iron Man 3 strikes a very dissonant chord within the MCU. It's a slice of a deeper, more interesting character exploration, which is something only a small handful of the films in the franchise have come close to pulling off.
He's my friend. So was I.
The movie's conclusion is close to getting the point it's trying to make, but I think it misses something crucial. You get to watch Tony finally move on, to see him become more than the guy in a suit he was at the start. And after 4 films, he really does feel like a fully realized character. But we're left with
I am Iron Man.
which is trying to show that his struggles have resulted in him truly becoming Iron Man. But I think the more important message to walk away with is that Tony Stark isn't Iron Man. He's Tony Stark.